So we've always aimed what we're doing to the individual who has got a particular interest, and in particular really kind of wants to know what the Chinese had to say about this stuff for themselves, what the Japanese had to say about this stuff for themselves. What do they teach themselves? So we haven't aimed for the school market. We've aimed for the people who, our latest, for example, want to read 2 volumes of translation of the basic theory text that is taught in Chinese medical schools. Not the one that shows up on the exam in the United States, the stuff that shows up on the exam in China.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Lately, I've been seeing more than a few patients with PTSD. It's not the usual PTSD that you're probably thinking of it as you listen to this. What I'm referring to here is pre-traumatic stress disorder. You've probably seen folks like this in your clinic as well. The people that are worried about the uncertainty of the future and spin up horribilized scenarios in their mind of something that's not actually happened yet. But, of course, their body reacts to it because the mind is so thoroughly entangled into the body. I'm not suggesting that we should help our patients disconnect their mind from their body. That would bring about a whole other set of problems. But helping to settle the mind, that perhaps is a good place to start. I might be politically incorrect here, but it seems that lately there are patients who have the everyday stresses of being a human being, but rather than take on the challenge of talking to that roommate who doesn't do their share of the chores, instead of speaking up at work for what they want, or streaming an endless thought parade about world events over which they have absolutely no control, they instead avoid the very thing that would liberate them from the worry at hand. Often I find myself wanting to give these people not a treatment that provides some calm and shielding from their troubles, but instead crank up some gallbladder courage to dial up the gumption to face the situation and do something to intervene on their own behalf. It's always troublesome being on the edge of new growth, of breaking through the protective casing like that of the taproot of a tree that digs its way down into the dark after freeing itself from the constraint of its seed. Growth is like this. First, a breaking through, and then a journey down into the dark unknown, and then something green and vital has the possibility of shooting up. The troubles we face, they can be an excuse and a tribulation, or an assignment and invitation. One of the reasons I enjoy these history series conversations is that I get to hear how different people took on the challenges of a moment in time and not only lived themselves into an interesting life, they created something of value and helped to create a foundation that many of us all too easily take for granted today. The library of materials on acupuncture, herbal medicine, qigong, and moxibustion has grown to the point that you would need several lifetimes to read them all. But there was a time in the not-too-distant past when you easily could have read everything that was available in English. Bob felt, like so many in the early days, was following his interest and curiosity, and that led him into the world of publishing and Chinese medicine. It was unplanned and unseen, but, like the best things in life, emergent and relevant. Red Wing Books was one of the treasure houses of East Asian medicine books in the 80s and 90s that helped the practitioners of that time to learn the craft. Their publications today are part of the growing library in English that support our trade and give access to doctors both of the present and the past. There's always some good stories that go with creating something out of nothing. We're going to hear them in just a moment after a few words from the folks that make it possible for you to enjoy Qiological. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com. And where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Bob Felt, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. If it wasn't for you and Paradigm Press, man, it would have made my education a lot more difficult.
Well, good. Glad we were useful.
It's kind of the attitude, isn't it? Do something useful in life. Remember when I was young, my dad would always say, do something useful, like make yourself useful. I used to hate hearing that. You know, usually man had some damn chores to do or something.
Of course, the chores.
Turns out that's the best part of life, you know?
Well, I had enough chores as a kid.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What kind of chores did you have?
Well, we had stuff that had to be done every week, and my sister had some things she had to do, and I had things I had to do. I was for taking out garbage, and burning the trash. And if we practiced piano enough, we got out of some chores.
Oh, man. Bribery always works, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes. Still.
Maybe incentivizing is a better way to say it.
Okay. But it's still the good bribe. Practice your piano and you don't have to burn the trash till tomorrow.
Oh, but I mean, burning stuff is fun.
Well, I did play around with it. Do you remember wax milk cartons?
Oh, God, yes.
Well, those and other things, I'd build little cities out in the trash pile and set them aflame.
Then you burn them down.
And if there were any firecrackers available, they'd go hit various parts and pieces too.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, for sure. Boys will be boys. I don't know what it is. We just like blowing shit up.
I did, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's and fire, well, I mean, fire is just fascinating all by itself. It's a whole damn element in Chinese medicine. We know it's important.
Well, we've played a bit with it in our time.
Of course we did. So I want to spend a little time with you today, taking a trip back in the Chinese medicine Wayback Machine. You're one of those guys who was around early on, like before there were really books to read.
Yeah.
You were somehow involved in this. Like, what on earth would get a nice guy who likes to, build milk carton cities with firecrackers in them, and set them on fire? What would make a guy like you get involved with something like Chinese medicine?
Macrobiotics.
Macrobiotics. You're not the first person I've talked to say that. It seems like macrobiotics had an impact on people in a pretty significant way.
Well, that's what there was. In, I think, 1969, my peer group at Minnesota, where I'd gone to school at the University of Minnesota, wanted to go to Boston and study with Michio Kushi.
Mm.
And so, we'd been doing yoga in the living room and reading autobiography of a yogi and all of that. So off we went in a caravan to Boston, Massachusetts, where we moved into the Kushi study house on Boylston Street.
Oh, my goodness. A whole group of you.
Well, 4.
Uh-huh.
2 couples, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's where I can't say that's where I got started with things Asian, because my one of my humanities majors in school had been Asian art history. So I had some familiarity with the art and the history. But you lived in a study house and somebody cooked rice and vegetables and miso soup, and you went to Michio Kushi lectures. I think it was Thursday night. I don't actually remember, at a church,
Mm-hmm.
and listened to Michio Kushi.
And now, who is this Michio Kushi guy?
Michio Kushi was the Japanese fellow who more or less brought macrobiotics to the United States. Oshawa was here a couple of times, but Kushi came and set up residence in Brookline, Massachusetts. And so if you wanted to study macrobiotics, you went to Brookline, Massachusetts.
That was Mecca.
Kind of, yes. And so, you attended Michio Kushi's lectures. There were 3 little books from George Oshawa, and they had some of the basics of the notion. There really wasn't much notion beyond the basics. And, you ate group meals together, and it's a kind of communal life. I was less impressed with Micho Kushi than others in my group. So I started hanging out with a fellow by the name of Yuko Okada. And Yuko is the son of George Oshawa's student who founded Muso, the trading company from which all of the Japanese products used to come into the country. That was, tamari, shoyu, rice, miso, seaweed, all of the Japanese food products that were such a predominant role in macrobiotics. And Yuko had come over and he was supposed to fix the macrobiotic restaurant in downtown Boston called the Seventh Inn, which was in significant difficulties. And so Yuko brought a Japanese, an actual chef who'd come out of a school called Ozendai, which is cooking as a spiritual exercise. And so I went with Yuko and we picked up Hayashi at the airport. And between the three of us, we managed to get a little bit of information back and forth. And Hayashi set up and took over the Seventh Inn and established a kind of cooking school, basically a program where very Japanese style, you started out washing dishes, and when you got the dishes washed appropriately on time, then you could do short order cook. And if you could remember all the orders that they remembered, they yelled at you over the intercom, you might be able to move on to the fry later and do tempura. If you did that properly, you could move on and cut vegetables.
That sounds very zen. It's very militaristic.
It was very, very zen.
Very militaristic. Here's how you do it. Learn to do it.
Well, learn to do it. And,
yeah, no whining.
Cutting vegetables among Japanese chefs is not a minor exercise. It's a major exercise. Then you move on to cutting fish and for sushi and sashimi. And this is even more expensive. So you have to be even better at it. And as you've progressed through this, you get to be the cook. Means you get to come in at 4:30 in the morning and start all the first stocks and all the soup bases, etc. So,
and this is your idea of a good time back then.
Yeah, I liked Hayashi and I liked the restaurant. It was much more interesting to me than the Kushi lectures, which, yin and yang per George Oshawa are reversed and simplified. They did not believe that Westerners could understand a substance, ki, which not only formed the substance of the universe, but which caused activity within those substances. Right? So
yeah,
Oshawa said, okay, we're going to have yang chi and we're going to yin chi. And yang chi is basically all the good stuff. And yin chi is basically all the bad stuff. So,
oh my goodness. Oh, would that get you in trouble today or what?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been in trouble before. But so, yang is a substitute for you're young, you're in good shape, everything's fine. Oh, you're yin, you're going to be sick. So it got kind of reversed and backwardized. And so it was really more tautology than philosophy. So it wasn't actually that interesting. And then there were these lectures, supposedly famous lectures about basically the precession of the equinox. And it was a kind of, I don't know, what was the musical Hair, where, the age of Aquarius is the...
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of that kind of notion. And we're heading on to the age of the Aquarius, and et cetera, et cetera. So in my time there, I did, in fact, sit in on Michio Kushi's private sessions with people who were sick. So that, for me, that reduced down to a chart. And the chart was the basic diet, and then a sort of slider that said how much rice. And then if you had diabetes, maybe you got some of this and some of that. And if you had cancer, you got some of this and some of that. But
simple food therapy.
Yeah. But the part that I found most interesting was massage. Now, there were no books per se. There was Michio Kushi's Acupuncture in Ancient and Future Worlds. And that was a kind of, it was basic point locations.
Mm-hmm. So this guy, in addition to be a macrobiotist, if that's even a word, was also an acupuncturist.
No, he was not an acupuncturist.
He was not an acupuncturist.
He was not an acupuncturist. Later, after the Seventh Inn got back in order and the cooking school was running, he brought in Dr. Nakamura. Now, Dr. Nakamura was in the young leadership cadre for the Meiji School in Japan. And it's very common for Japanese to take their up-and-coming people and send them off somewhere. So they sent Nakamura off to Boston. And we got...
Sent him off on a mission.
Kind of. We got acupuncture lessons from Dr. Nakamura sitting in the booths at the front of the restaurant after the work was done.
I love it.
Yeah, really.
How old were you?
Oh, let's see. In 1969, 1970, I'm 25.
You're 25. What a wild, crazy thing, huh?
Oh, it was, Boston macrobiotics was wild and crazy, period. I don't know how much of macrobiotics is left.
I don't know. I never really got that into it. It first came to my attention. I was in college. No, I just dropped out of college. And I remember I was traveling around with this person, and she was into macrobiotics. So, she loaded up on rice and those, what are those plums, those sour plums?
Umeboshi.
Well, that was an experience the first time, and
oh, they're wonderful on corn.
Yeah. Anyway.
Roast corn and umeboshi is good. Yeah.
I remember, just being exposed to it. I'd heard about it. Never really got my attention. I'm a Midwest corn-fed burger guy, So it didn't quite land with me, but I knew about it, and I've talked to a lot of folks on this history series who started with macrobiotics. I know it was a big thing. I guess things just arise and pass away in their own times.
I haven't followed. I haven't been involved with any of the macrobiotic books for a very, very long time. And the macrobiotic people in my life are from my era, and they are former macrobiotic people.
It seemed like a very limited diet.
It is a limited diet. We're back in the late 1960s, and macrobiotics is attracting people who have been through the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And the political aspects of it were interesting. It changes the ecology of the world to change the diet. And so
I think there are people who would say the same thing today. The whole vegan movement, very much in alignment with that sentiment.
Yes, no question. And so I have to guess because I didn't know everybody, but I would say that a significant percentage of the people who were attracted to macrobiotics had come out of the anti-war movement. It come out of social justice sorts of orientations.
What did you guys call it back then? I don't think you called it social justice. Did you?
I don't know either.
I'm trying to remember what it was called. It wasn't social justice. That's a new framing. That's a new term. I don't remember what it was in this. I was still pretty young. I'm younger than you.
Uh-huh.
I was really a kid when that was happening. It was like, whoa, what's that? I wasn't in it. I was watching it. But I don't remember that word social justice. There was civil rights, I think is...
Civil rights.
Civil rights, I think, is what we were talking about back then.
Civil rights, anti-war.
Anti-war for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Civil rights, that is what it was.
So, there were interesting parts there. Massage was interesting, and I was fortunate to be able to learn massage with people like Shizuko Yamamoto and Masahiro Oki, and people who were not casually trained, who had come out of the Japanese tradition, and who were significantly trained and significantly demanding in their teaching. And I did enjoy the restaurant. I enjoyed cooking, and it's, kinetic is the word. It's hot and it's sweaty, and there's this whole sort of machismo part of the macrobiotic world where, you can stand there in front of the short order stove and keep it up even though you're soaked in sweat and you're burning your hair, So that was nice. I enjoyed that. And I learned a bunch of useful things, but acupuncture got to be interesting because associated with the macrobiotic community were people who had been trained by Tin Yao So.
Mm-hmm.
One in particular, Don Halfkenny, was a friend and our acupuncturist.
I've heard about that guy. He sounded like a real firecracker.
He is. He'd pin you to the table, too. So's stimulus is, famous, I guess is the word. And pinned to the table is not something that no one ever used in response to Halfkenny or Tin Yao So. So that was the thing that got me interested. And then by 73-ish, I went up to Canada, to Montreal, to start where I'd been going up to teach massage, but to start a restaurant with some Canadian partners.
Now, had you been studying acupuncture at this point, or it's just kind of there on the periphery of the other things that you're doing?
It's there on the periphery. The people who were studying acupuncture went to the New England school when it was just Tin Yao So, which I did not do. Now, later when I did Tin Yao So's books, he never read the English. I would put together a chapter, let's say, the bladder meridian.
Yeah. Hey, sit just a little closer to the, yeah, there you go.
So I would do that. He wouldn't read it, but I would have to show him all the point locations. The book I was producing couldn't possibly rewrite if I couldn't do the locations. So I went through everything in Tin Yao So's books, needing to demonstrate that I could do that before he considered the books done.
That's brilliant, actually. Like, how good is this book? Well, can I take someone who doesn't know it, read the book, and do it?
No, I have no objection to it.
Yeah, no, I think it's brilliant. Now,
but at that time, back in the macrobiotic era, that hadn't happened yet. And so I didn't become involved in acupuncture until I went I went up to Canada to build this restaurant, which took a couple of years. And while I was up there, I gained a minor fluency in French and found Soulier de Morin.
Now there's an interesting treasure, huh?
Yeah. Well, Soulier doesn't get any credit. Nobody pays any attention to Soulier de Morin, which is a shame because the book has got tons of really useful stuff. And his trouble was he's not Chinese. So people haven't acquired any interest.
This is the Vietnamese tradition, right?
No, the Vietnamese tradition comes from someone who actually studied with Soulier de Morin, who I'm going to have trouble with the name here. because I have trouble with names, Van Gogh, Nguyen Van Gogh. And he was the Vietnamese, but he actually studied in France. There was also the Frenchman Chamfrot, who he's also related to Soulier de Morant, but through Van Gogh.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did you find interesting about Sulian's book?
Well, Soulier de Morant went to China already fluent in Chinese. He was a banker, a French banker. And he had grown up in a literary household, in his parents' household, where Chinese people had been present, and he'd acquired the Chinese language as a child. That's why he was sent as a diplomat to China. And when he was there, he started to study. But what he did with his book that was really interesting is every time he'd look at a point and what were the indications for this particular acupoint, he would look at both modern Chinese, well, modern at the time, which is the end of the Qing dynasty, and then he'd also look at Japanese texts. So what you get in Soulier de Morant is you get this, what am I going to call that? You get this tour through acupoints and their applications. And so you can look at it from the different points of view that are in his book. So, of course, the other value about Soulier de Morant is it actually goes back to the source languages. He started with a dictionary. So before he translated to French, he produced a dictionary for his own use. Now, when we worked on that book, Paul James...
So he made his own gloss.
Yes. When we worked on that book, Paul Jameski went to Paris, found his relatives, and got access to the card set that Soulier de Morant had used in translation, coming from Chinese to French. So that made it really easy. And it's also another value of the book is there's no in between. The original language moves through the French directly. And so we did the same thing with the English version. So although Soulier de Morant did equate qi with energy, he hung on to the actual definitions in his instructions and to the book that he produced. The other thing was, this is one of the first set of charts, which was interesting because Tin Yao So's teacher, Qing Danan, was a source of the charts that are in Soulier de Morant, because Qing Danan was one of the first people to actually produce a book of charts.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. You know, it is extraordinary how there are these threads that seem to find each other and bring something forward.
Yeah, well, you know, it was Tin Yao is right out of the apprentice tradition.
Yes. There were no schools back then.
So, no, and it wasn't taught in a school,
No.
right? You acquired a teacher and you went through the same thing that Hayashi set up in the restaurant, only, you rolled moxa and you did this and you did that. And eventually you got to insert some needles, and eventually the teacher would tell you how to deal with this particular patient. But the notion that there was this body of knowledge called acupuncture existed, to the extent that you have books like the Great Compendium of Acupuncture, where these things are put together, and the Chinese literary penchant for putting together these large compilations, like, for example, the Materia Medicus. So, anyway, so it was a kind of very narrow point that was bringing acupuncture into Western consciousness.
Yes.
Right? And that point was Tin Yao So, Soulier de Morant, Ban Gi, and of course, you go back into the 1800s, the 1700s, there were recognitions that acupuncture existed, and there were European books about it, but those had very little effect. It was Soulier de Morant that had the majority of the effect in Europe.
Now, some of the teachers in Europe, Van Buren, Worsley, I think there was one other who I can't remember off the top of my head. Were they influenced by de Morant's book?
I would assume so, but I don't know so. I did not know those people. I knew of those people, but I had no personal relationship. I had a personal relationship with a fellow, Jan Tholle, who had come to Boston to study. He was actually a French chef. And he came to Boston to study, and he later became involved with the Worsley group. And he worked with Worsley and Van Buren, but I did not. I did not know them. I met Jack Worsley, but I was not a student.
Now, how do you go from being this macrobiotic cook, restaurateur, to a book publisher?
Well, in macrobiotics, Kushi had created a business called Dow Books and Publications, and it went bankrupt. Chapter 13, you have no choice. You're bankrupt. We're selling all of your stuff. We're going to pay your creditors, and that's it. And Kushi hired me to be the manager of that, working with the bankruptcy lawyer. And my job was to prepare the public auction of those products for sale. There wasn't all that much left. But because of doing that work, and because I am the one who bought the supply of books at the public auction and started a bookstore, Red Wing Book Company, I worked with Yoshio Fujiwara, who came in after the disappearance of Dow Books and put out the series of books on macrobiotics, also on massage, and just edging into acupuncture with a book called Subo, which was, again, a point book. So that's how, just accident and whim.
Accident and whim.
Major motives, yeah.
You know, I think about hunch and whim in my life, and it's kind of been my compass. You know, it's gotten me through to where I am.
Well, why not?
Well, for some people, there's probably a good reason why not, but others of us work that way. Something comes along, looks like an interesting opportunity, and who knows where it goes. So you open a bookstore.
As the dean of disciplinary action at the University of Minnesota, who was throwing me out of school, said, "Well, you can always be an opportunist."
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Okay. You got thrown out of school?
I got thrown out of school, yeah.
You got thrown out of school?
Yeah.
Well, you can always be an opportunist.
You can always be an opportunist.
He says that like being an opportunist is a bad thing.
Oh, he didn't like me very much.
What were you doing?
SDS.
Oh, one of those. You and the Ted Kapchuk. I'm telling you, this early Chinese medicine cohort, you guys were on the radical side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Radical bad.
And here you are turning establishment by opening a damn bookstore and becoming a capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
Explain that.
But, a regular career wasn't in the books.
I hear you. A regular career was not in the books. You had to be your own boss. You got to make your own thing.
And you need to earn a living.
Yes.
And so, bookstore.
Love it. What kind of books did you sell at Red Wing? And Red Wing, why Red Wing? That sounds like a shoe company.
Well, Red Wing is the boys' reformatory in Minnesota. It's the old Bob Dylan song, The Walls of Red Wing.
I do not remember. I'll have to go look that up.
Well, that's early, and it's about the boys' reformatory.
Now, there's a word you don't hear very often these days. Reformatory.
Well, underage bad kids went to the reformatory.
Yeah, reformatory. Now I think it's just called juvenile justice or something. Reformatory.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah. People that went to the reformatory, they're, you don't want to mess with them.
Well, bunch of potheads.
Troublemakers.
Troublemakers, yeah.
All right. So Red Wing came from the reformatory. What other kind of books were you selling there? Were you selling books on how to make bombs and shit?
No, there were books on, there was a lot of health. There was massage. There was, Krishnamurti. I guess I don't know. It's not quite an occult bookstore, although, all bookstores like that earned a big hunk of their living with ephemerises for astrology.
I did not know that.
Well, every time someone wanted to do a chart for someone, they needed to have the ephemeris for the birth year. And they came, I think, in 5-year units. So people who were doing astrology had to buy ephemerides.
A whole set of them.
Yes. So that was a real...
So they could know where the planets were because they didn't have iPhones with an app.
That's right. And at that time, they didn't have computers that calculated those things.
You had to do your own math.
You had to do your own. It was all by hand charting.
And those were a big popular item for the counterculture.
A regular item. You had a shelf. The bookstore had a shelf unit in the astrology section that was full of the ephemerides.
I'll be darned. So like the Bible is for a regular bookstore, ephemeri were for the alternative crowd.
Kind of the more biblical stuff were like Rajneesh, the whole guru-oriented stuff coming in from India.
Okay, so you were about health, well-being, massage, spirituality. That was your focus.
Yes, yeah.
How did the publishing piece evolve? In for a penny, in for a pound?
All right. Well, we had 2 bookstores, one in Harvard Square and one on Newbury Street. And the one on Harvard Square, we had lots of activities. We had insight meditation classes. And Thich Nhat Hanh came and gave lectures. And we had, You
were like ground zero for this stuff.
What?
You were like ground zero for this stuff.
Well, Cambridge, Massachusetts had 84 bookstores within walking distance of Harvard Square.
Wow, there's some competition.
Well, no, it's not competition. It's you want to be where people read books. And Harvard Square was a place where people read books. But, you had what we don't have anymore, thanks to Amazon destroying independent bookselling. What you had is I could go over to Asian books, and as often as not, the guy behind the counter was doing a PhD on Tang Dynasty poetry. So they would have classes. So you could go over there and learn about things, Asian philosophy, by people who were actually working in Asian philosophy.
There was a whole ecosystem of, I'm going to call it literati.
Well, it was true for if you were studying German, or it was true for all the language groups. It was true for the arts. It was true for the sciences. There were among all of these bookstores people who maintained collections around a language or a theme. And those people, the people doing the collections, knew what they were doing. Now, that era of bookselling is gone. The first people to get rid of it were places like, it was called Wordsworth in Harvard Square, which was your first discounter coming in. And this is local discounter. So you'd look up from your bookstore counter and there'd be somebody with a notepad going through a section of your books. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, those books would be on discount over at Wordsworth. Then Wordsworth, right, wasn't enough to deal with the really big discounters that started to come in. And the really big discounters weren't enough to deal with Amazon. So the whole, what we've lost in the book selling business is the bookseller.
And not just the bookseller, but the community that would frequent that bookstore. Look, I remember I spent a lot of my life in Seattle, lots of great bookstores. And just what you were talking about. There's classes, there's events, different bookstores had different themes. They had their own ecosystems, right? They had their own orbit of people.
There's a bulletin board. Yeah. And a bulletin board where everybody who was going to do this, that, or the other thing could post their poster.
That's right.
So bookstores were the center of a community of people of like interests.
Yes. Face to face, discovering something together in real time. Yeah.
Yeah. It was not a bad life.
No. I mean, I remember frequenting bookstores as a college student, and they were magical. I mean, they were actually magical because you never knew what you were going to find. You never knew who you were going to meet. There were always interesting characters. And I'm telling you, I could just wander through one of those old bookstores.
Yeah,
and I just, my eyes would alight on something. And I just I have to look at that.
Yeah, intellectual smorgasbord.
Zen navigation is what I called it. I mean, there were things I did not know I needed to read, but I managed to find my way to them, or they found their way to me.
Well, there were things you didn't even know existed until you got into the bookstore.
Exactly.
Blavatsky, Bailey.
That's right.
All of the British occultists, all of that. You know about that coming out of high school in the United States.
How could you?
No.
This is why you go to college.
So the bookstore played a nice role for a period of time in our history.
Yes.
And what happened that I ended up with the publishing, which I think was the start of this question, was that I had bought at least a mini computer, and I was writing code.
What was it? What kind of mini computer did you lease?
It was called an Onyx.
God, I don't remember those. Onyx, huh?
Well, it was early on hard disk based on the Z8000 chip, which is a monster compared to what we have now. But I was working on a kind of coding that would allow me to produce catalogs, because we had run across the problem that in order to get expand the selection of books in massage, to find books in acupuncture, to bring any of these things into the country, you had to order as a wholesaler.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Right? Because you're shipping it across the ocean. It's got to go gross shipping.
Yes. And you need to be able to order in enough quantity that you can get a price that you can make a profit on, because you're not working for someone punching a clock. We know that.
Yeah, well, then you've got to find places to do it. And there were two problems I needed to solve: mailing list and producing typeset text. Now, mailing list in those days, you had to go to a mailing house, and the mailing house could produce your labels and label your catalogs, etc., but they were expensive. And the same thing, you could submit a manuscript, a typescript, to someone who'd type it into the CompuGraphic typesetter and produce the galleys. Then the galleys had to be chopped up and put what's called key lining to be made into pages. But I'd been hanging around enough computer people to understand that this could be done with a computer. So my goal was to start our own mailing list and to produce our own labels.
Oh my God.
So we could produce our own catalogs, so we could sell to other places the books that we had to order in mass in order to get them for ourselves. Well, it's not a long step from catalog to book.
Mm-hmm.
So when John Meyerson, who was president of NISA, came over and said, would you be interested in doing Tin Yao Tso's books? I said yes. And that's where that started.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
I love it. So often there's something that comes along. The question is, can you do this? I don't know about you, but me, in the back of my mind is, can I do this? Not yet, but I'm going to tell you yes, because I think I can. I think there's something in this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it started there, and then
So you did Dr. Tso's books.
I did.
That got you started.
Yes. It was the first significant project besides our own catalogs.
Yeah. Well, what a luminary character to take on as your first project.
Tso is underrated.
Well, I think he's just not known about.
He is.
I mean, at this point, he's not known about.
Well, yeah. And Dr. Tso has a fascinating history. He was a Christian preacher. He did acupuncture as his witness. This was how Dr. Tso was showing his faith to people. And this got him in trouble after the liberation of 1949.
I'll bet.
So,
oh my goodness.
Tso had been beaten. Tso swam to Hong Kong with a barrel.
Yeah. Wow.
So was at that period of time, he'd begun to shake
How old was he then?
from, oh, that's going to be hard
Ish. Roughly. Yeah.
ish, just before retirement age,
Okay. He's in his 50s, 60s.
60s, I think.
He's in his 60s when he's doing this at NISA.
Oh boy, I hate it. I should remember his birthday, but I don't.
Okay. But he's not a young man.
No, he's not a young man, and he's beginning to shake, which is because of the damage to his spinal cord. And so the doctors told him, look, we can scrape this calcification off your spinal cord and you'll stop shaking. And so he wanted to continue practicing. So he had that surgery and it left him paralyzed. He could move one arm. So this had several effects. One, it put Dr. So out of business. And number two, it put the school into what is referred to as the NISA crisis. And it was a mess. There was a student strike, and you had factions that were only interested in what they did in China, and Dr. So isn't what they did in China, and Dr. So is a second level or a not as good as TCM, etc. Then you threw into this
Because he is pre-TCM, actually.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I wonder how the students felt about him being Christian.
I don't know. I don't know how much they dealt with it. I had to deal with it because I spent a very long time showing up at his house every week with some part of a manuscript or some demonstration that I had to do. But I don't know.
Yeah. So,
But the real issue there, besides the fact that we really didn't know all that much about Chinese medicine.
and that's a fact back in those days. Like, how much do we know? Not a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not a lot. But there's a lot of opinions about what we do know. And so there's this tension between Dr. So and TCM. There's this tension because the school had hired a fellow with an ED, a doctorate in education, and he was supposed to be working with curriculum. But he made himself very unpopular by announcing that basically acupuncture was bullshit.
Oh my goodness. And he's in charge of curriculum.
Oh yeah, this guy
Of an acupuncture school.
Yeah, of an acupuncture school.
Okay, that's a problem.
So you can see the degree of mess we have here. So I'm working on So's books. And again, John Meyerson says, why don't you join the board? I say, okay, this is the kind of responsibilities that you take up when you're engaged in the field.
Yes.
So I joined the board. Most of the board left, and the school was basically falling apart. It hadn't paid its rent. It was in arrears for what's called the bond, etc. And kind of intuitively, I thought somebody wants this school. There's no reason for student strikes, etc., for any of these problems, except that they're leverage over the ability of the school to operate. Now, I can't tell you that so-and-so was trying to get control of the school, but that's what it felt like to me. But I'm not part of the in-group. I'm the interloper from outside who's doing Dr. So's book and who has a bookstore. So I never actually knew all of the things that were going on, but I did know the school was about to not survive. So Tom Ryamaki, the founder of Oriental Medical Supplies, OMS, and one of the nicest human beings that the planet has ever had, and I sat down and we took Tom's mailing list because he had the better mailing list. And we mailed a notice to everybody on that mailing list. The owners of a nonprofit in Massachusetts are the people of Massachusetts. So the people of Massachusetts have the right to elect the board. So we sent this notice to everybody we could, put up posters around the community that if you wanted to be a director, you could put your name in and there would be a vote and we would vote on directors. However, the notice also said that as a director of the New England School of Acupuncture, you will be personally responsible for the bond. Now, in Massachusetts, if you collect tuition from someone, you have to have a bond that covers the refund of that permission, that tuition, in case your school fails.
Okay.
That bond,
So if you fail, your students get their money back.
they get their money back, right?
Okay.
But the bond has to be backed by something. So the backers of the bond are the board of directors.
Okay. So this is an invitation to become a board of director. All right. There's some responsibility, and your wallet is going to be on the line.
To stand for,
Who would want that job?
yes. Well, Tom Riamaki and I did it. We had things that you could mortgage, that somebody say, okay, we can take this away from you if you don't pay. And then almost no one wanted to be a director.
Well, I mean, look, the risk is not insignificant. The responsibility, the time, like, who wants to put their house on the line for something like that? I mean, you did.
Well, we felt that we had to. We were making an investment in this field, and to not be there for the school in your own backyard seemed to be a little unwise. You need these schools. If you're going to educate people and you're going to develop a field, you have to have some place for them to study. And if this thing goes away, and it's about the only one in the country, so felt it had to be done.
Bob felt that is a deep, profound sense of dedication.
Well, it worked out.
Well, yeah, it did. I'm glad it did.
Well, it kind of worked out. The school made it. One of the fellows who was working for me and who, in fact, continued to get a paycheck for me was Rick Feit. And he became a real decent leader for the school because he was able to put together a group of people, a like-minded people who wanted to do the same thing. And so the school moved forward.
I'm deeply struck by this story, and I'm deeply struck for a couple of reasons. One, and I've said this in another history podcast, if you're a listener of the podcast, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it again because it's really true. I'm so grateful to people like you who showed up in the beginning, because it meant that in the 90s, I could study and walk into a profession. It's not insignificant what you guys created. So there's that. There's that kind of courage and vision. But here's the other thing.
There are any number of people who would.
We're talking at a moment, as we're recording this, I just heard last week, yet another school has disappeared. I don't know if they had a bond or not. I don't know where their students are going. I don't know what's happening. But, I mean, we're in a phase right now with our profession where schools are failing.
Yeah, it's going to, it always had to shake out the original sort of enthusiasm was always going to be tempered by the number of people practicing acupuncture that the country was going to be able to support.
So you think our number have we overshot that carrying capacity?
No, I think we're way under that carrying capacity. But I think the ability to increase the carrying capacity is retarded at both our level and at the level of the culture itself. So it's going to take time. If If I had a magic wand, what would it be? I would insert acupuncture and Chinese medicine at the level above the worried well and below the acutely ill. And I would point out, look, these are things we can do. There's massage, there's acupuncture, there's Chinese medicine. These are things that we can do that it can establish wellness, that can deal with problems, including all of our genetic frailties, before they become diseases that have to be treated more aggressively. Then the number of practitioners is uncountable. But that position hasn't opened up in our society.
How could we aim ourselves at that?
I don't know. First of all, we'd have to say it. We'd have to say, this is what we're good for. We can do this. And we can produce people who are capable of doing this. As you know, most people with what you could call successful acupuncture practices are doing acupuncture and a kind of combo with Chinese medicine, a formula-based prescription. And a lot of these are people who know how to do some things pretty well and who have a following. I have a really good friend, now retired, who set up a clinic in a gym and had a ongoing practice with athletes. And he knew how to deal with problems of athletics that athletes get. He knew how to teach people how not to get those problems, how to warm up, how to stretch, how to do these kind of things. So Mark had an excellent practice, but Mark wasn't attempting to deal with cancer patients. Now, I do know people who dealt with cancer patients, and they use Chinese medicine and acupuncture to support the patient through their chemo or their radiation. So there are these places where certain individuals who are capable of telling an audience of what it is they are capable of doing, and then being capable of doing that, who have established practices.
Sure. I mean, that's just marketing 101.
Yes.
Like what do you got and who's it for?
Well, as having taught 8 years worth of practice management classes, I can tell you very few people are instinctively able to do marketing 101.
Well, yes. Unless you grew up in a family of business people, you probably don't. That being said, it's a teachable skill. It's not difficult. The principles, here's the thing about marketing, at least from my point of view. I'm not a marketing expert, but I've learned how to market my practice over the years that I've done it. I've looked at a number of different people, methods, whatever you want to call it. It's like so many things, Bob. The principles of marketing. I don't care if you're selling cars, acupuncture, fertility services, massage, fancy groceries. The principles are the same.
Yeah.
There's nothing fancy about it. Like, oh, we got marketing for introverts or whatever. No, it's actually just marketing.
Well, but for any kind of medicine, you need to fit within the system of referrals and recommendations and standing, and that hasn't happened yet. It has happened in places and with individuals.
So
people who...
Where do you see it having happened? Can you give me an example?
Well, my friend who had the athletic here in Taos, New Mexico, we have, I might get this wrong, 1, 2, 3 acupuncturists who have active practice, and you have a lady who on the swimming team I swim with, and she's a tremendous athlete, and so she's got every muscle sinew problem in the world showing up at her door.
Yeah, so she's a specialist and she knows how to market to that. I mean, look, we got fertility. There's a lot of people that do fertility. I don't think it's lost on our trade that if you can specialize in something that you enjoy, you can have a good living.
You can have a relationship with the people who are going to be your patients. And then we have another nice young lady here, Clara, and she has a kind of women's practice, the whole OB-GYN territory. Then the fellow I go to, Jim Dixon, has been around as long as I have and is a reader and, is into the actions of the individual herbs in a formula and all of that kind of stuff. And I see Jim because I have the sort of things that 80-year-olds have.
Yeah. So,
right. So even in Taos, New Mexico, you can establish those things. Now, my physician, who's the son of my physician,
that's what you get for living so old,
is an open-minded fellow, and he'll send his patients off. But my girlfriend's physician doesn't even know there's acupuncturists in town.
Mm-hmm.
So the market is going to have to be opened by the collection of individuals who find their way into a local environment.
Yes.
Now, I don't know much about education in the country right now because I expected the education market, just like I saw with Fujiwara and the macrobiotic and massage books, I expected the market to be dominated by capital. And it has been dominated by capital. And it's the same formula that everybody uses everywhere. A company with capital comes in, they get a bankable author who's willing to go to all these shows and talk at this symposium and that symposium. They have enough money to produce a lot of volume of material within a relatively short period of time and a sales force that can go out and just push it onto the market. So I have never really been committed to, I like selling to acupuncture schools, but I haven't wanted to publish in a world that I know is going to be dominated by somebody who's got a lot more money than I do. So we've always aimed what we're doing to the individual who has got a particular interest and in particular really kind of wants to know what the Chinese had to say about this stuff for themselves, what the Japanese had to say about this stuff for themselves. What do they teach themselves? So we haven't aimed for the school market. We've aimed for the people who, our latest, for example, want to read 2 volumes of translation of the basic theory text that is taught in Chinese medical schools. Not the one that shows up on the exam in the United States, the stuff that shows up on the exam in China, right? Now, this is implicitly a smaller market.
Yes. Well, you're aiming, it's a niche market for sure. And look, as far as I can tell, niche is where you want to be, unless you want to be the big conglomerate.
We're a sweat capital organization. We don't compete with that.
That's right. That's right. Well, you'd be kicked out of an organization like that. Why would you want to be in it? But I just want to say that the thing about aiming at the people who have a specialty interest, there's now I'm getting to the age where I can't remember words. There's something very, God, now I sound like an idiot because I actually can't think about what it is I want to say. I'm going to say satisfying about helping people go deep in what they're doing and giving them access to material that you just can't get anywhere else.
Well, it's also the best way to get access to the material.
Well, it's a good way to get access to the material, but it's also an incredible way to grow as a practitioner, to get access to the kind of materials that you're talking about. Look, earlier on in this conversation, we're talking about the incredible treasure that Morant's book is because of who he was and how he did it and what is in it. And, you started off at a time, there were no books on acupuncture. I mean, doing Dr. So's book, what a coup, what a feather in your cap.
We were able to import Helen Chancellor's book on 4-point acupuncture. Felix.
No, tell me about that. That's a Korean book?
Yes, it's based on Korean. I think based on Korean, maybe Japanese. I haven't looked at it.
No, I think, no. 4-point comes out of the Korean Sa'am.
Yeah.
I've been studying that a bit.
Then the Felix Mann books out of England. And they were pretty well at the bottom of the barrel there. There was Manfred Porkert. There was Elsevier. But, there wasn't a lot that was available at that time.
Yes. And, learning acupuncture is a weird thing. So, is there, in China, there's a textbook for it because you're giving people access to the material that's in the, current school curriculum there. Here in the United States, it seems like because it grew up as such a weird fringe thing, just getting access to a book and having the dedication to learn what's in it, that's what got people going. And then it's like the education wasn't really standardized. Until the Council of Psychologists came together and they decided they had to have a certain kind of curriculum. But it seems to me, and this is just as a student of acupuncture and a practitioner, I'm not an educator by any stretch of the imagination, but I've always been fascinated by these books that come out, and it's like there's a whole world in here if you decide to go into it.
There's thousands of volumes in the source language.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
The Beijing School of Chinese Medicine has an air-conditioned, climate-controlled section where they have originals of manuscripts. And there are more in the historic manuscripts. There are more books there than are available in English.
Yeah, of course.
And if you go to the schools, the libraries are vast compared to anything we have.
Well, just the bookstores in China.
Yeah.
It was always fun going to bookstores in China. Like, what do I want to load up on? I've got a lifetime of reading. I got 3 lifetimes of reading.
So the next step, I think, is we have to start figuring out what it is about our education that works. When we have a test and we have textbooks and we have things that schools do and we have things that students have to do to be allowed to practice. So I think what we want to do next is to follow up and start to say, okay, 5 years out, how many of these people are practicing? And what are they practicing? And what is it that they needed to know that they didn't know? And then we can start modifying education to improve the number of people who can establish ongoing practices.
It seems like we had a heyday there for a while, right? A lot of schools and then doctoral degrees, right? People came out with doctoral degrees and a whole big push and evidently opportunity in, air quotes, integrated medicine. And it seemed like up until recently, like the system we had was working. Sure, there's people that would get out of school and 5 years later they weren't practicing. Maybe they didn't know enough about business. Maybe they actually weren't suitable for being a practitioner anyway. I knew people that graduated acupuncture school that made me worried because we had the same degree and the same title, and they frightened me with their particular attitude. I heard they went out of business. I was relieved. I know this sounds harsh, right? So is this just a reckoning that we just have to get tighter with our qualifications and really stand by it?
again, I don't know that much about what education is like now these days. My association with NISA ended years ago, and I haven't been to one of those meetings of which there were thousands, it seemed, about curriculum and what should be taught in 1,000 years too. So I don't know exactly what's going on, but we had COVID. We had a period of time where the job market wasn't so good, and we had student loans. So I think we probably hyped the number of people going to acupuncture school above the ones that we could absorb into the practice culture, and probably a bunch of people who weren't there for the right reason.
It seems to me, in terms of practice culture, you gave some great examples of people in your neighborhood. They've got specific practices that match who they are, and they have a crowd of people that they serve. I think the market for doing acupuncture is only limited by your imagination. I think there's a ton of opportunity, but you have to be willing to experiment a bit, put yourself out there.
Yeah, you have to be able to engage. That's why people who are part of a community, I think, are in a better position to establish a practice than people who've just shown up in town.
Depends on the town. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. We don't have that many acupuncturists. Man, someone shows up here, they could build a practice and help a lot of people because we're underserved.
Well, I'm in Taos, New Mexico. We're an art colony.
Yeah, land of enchantment.
Yeah, we're an art colony layered on top of a majority Hispanic population.
Yeah, so maybe more different places have their different challenges for sure.
Yeah, but the Hispanic population has had curanderas. In some ways, I think they're more amenable. Besides, we do farming and ranching, and our backs hurt and our arms get tired and we get bruises and stuff like that. So in some ways, maybe our community is more amenable to acupuncture than, say, where I grew up in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which is pretty well off, highly well served with doctors, and a lot of people who are engaged in conventional style livelihoods.
Well, I think one of the bits of good news for us is acupuncture's been around long enough now, and enough people have heard of it that it's not as strange as it used to be.
No. Well, when back in those early days at NISA, you could still get arrested for it. Or as if, right?
Yeah, that was part of its charm. Yeah. So you're still publishing? You still in that game?
Well, my oldest son and his wife and my grandson are the ones who do the day-to-day work. And I have just finished one book, and I'm working on 2 books with Elizabeth Rochaw.
Wonderful.
And one of those will be a redo of Rooted in Spirit. And the other one is tentatively titled 101 Notions in Chinese Medicine, which is Elizabeth telling us from the classical sources what they were talking about when they used these words.
Great. So,
yeah, I enjoy it. I mean,
it sounds like you enjoy it. Well, look, man, you've been at it for decades. It seems you've served our community in tremendous ways. It sounds like you've had a great ride. I'm glad you've got a succession plan.
Well, I don't know who's going to edit books in this territory. I've had a couple of hopeful young people who were interested and did some publishing, but they've all moved on. There's a lot of product in our field that is comestible. So herbs, you use them up and you have to buy more. needles. You use them up and you have to buy more. A book, you buy it once and pass it on to your friends.
Yes.
So people with a kind of entrepreneurial instinct have sort of headed in the other direction. And of course, with Elsevier sitting on top of the school market, laying its golden eggs, why it's not an interesting pursuit. Even if you came up with something to replace one of those books, a salesman would show up at the school and say, hey, guess what? I have a special salesman's discount for you, and I can get you this book at 50% off. So it's not the most exciting place to try and earn a living.
I can see that. I can see the challenge that because your market is not so much the schools, it's really dedicated students and practitioners who are by definition dedicated students.
Well, the way I've always thought about it is it's time. You're trying to sell a bunch of books over time. You're not trying to sell a whole bunch of books over a shorter time. We want things that will stay in print, that people will want in the next generation of acupuncturists, that have shown us from China and Japan that these things have been valuable for people for long periods of time. That's why we became so involved with the notion of what is a translation? When can you say, what do you have to do to show your bona fides that this thing you're showing to people is in some way equivalent to what it came from?
Wow. We could do a whole conversation on that. What you're talking about here is accurate transmission.
Yeah. How do we know what we think we know? What are the guarantees of validity? At one time, I was thinking about this certainty that when the market got large enough to invite capital, that the capital would come in and squash it and just take over. And I tried to get this thing called COMP, Council of Oriental Medical Publishers, started. And the idea was, look, nobody's going to tell you what you have to do. If this is just your opinion, it's your opinion, but label it. And if it's a translation that has these source guarantees, if it's a translation that has this kind, we label everything. And if we label it, then it's much harder for the capital to come in and dominate. First of all, it's more expensive. If you want to say, this is what is said in China about, in this period, about this subject, you have to show that between your English and the Chinese, there's some form of orderly transmission. And that's a lot more expensive, and a lot fewer people can do that than can more or less read a text and decide what they think they should tell you about it.
How do you validate that?
Peer review, publish. You just publish. I mean, how many have published a 900-page dictionary and an uncounted number of papers that are saying this in Chinese is what we say in English. And oh, by the way, we've learned something new, so we changed our mind, and this is what we say in English. But it always goes back to the Chinese. So if it's wrong, point to it and say this is wrong, and we'll go change it. That's why you have people like Anschold and Weissman who are at that stuff all the time.
And it's tricky because the language changes over time as well.
Yeah, that's why the philology counts. You have to say who, what, when, and where.
Yes. Well, Mr. Bob Felt, not bad for getting kicked out of school.
Oh, I was a bad boy. I liked me some pot, some LSD, all those bad, evil things.
Yeah, and now now you can buy them on the internet. I'm telling you, the way that yin and yang like switch and flip things around, you live long enough. And it's like, oh my God, things really do turn into their opposites. It's true.
Shaw had 12 principles like that, Everything that has a front has a back. Things change into their opposite at the extremes.
It's true.
And yeah, those things pop into my mind now and again.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to think about, especially yin yang, oh, things turn into their opposite. I used to think, wow, that's really groovy. That's kind of cool. That's cool, man. Wow, things change into their opposite. But I got to tell you, the older I get, the more I look at that, I go, holy shit, things turn into their opposite. That means like almost everything that I thought I knew is probably at some point going to get flipped around. I'm going to go, oh, I was missing something. Now I see the other side. There is a unity here. Huh.
Everything I thought I knew, I didn't know.
Yeah. Kind of like starting off on a new career, What do I know? Not much, but I'll go in the direction where things seem to be going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that you would have to say to newer practitioners who are kind of setting off on their journey right now?
Oh, I don't know. Find your community. Know what you're good at. Find what is it that was easy for you, that you had a notion of, or it fit your way of thinking, because it's not all just the same for any one individual. Somebody's going to be better at something or have a better sense, or their instincts for diagnosis will be a little better in this territory. So, figure out what it is that is your bailiwick, and then just keep learning.
That sounds like pretty reasonable advice to me.
Well, I just hope people keep coming at it. And, we fill out this mid-level and less people find their way to the chronic level and the acute stages and all of that kind of stuff. It's acupuncture and Chinese medicine are something that Asian culture can contribute to our culture, to our benefit.
Absolutely.
And so that's the whole idea.
The other thing that I've noticed, because I think it's been in our culture long enough to some degree, that it's like a transplant that has put its roots down here in the West and growing its own kind of thing. I mean, I see all kinds of people doing things with like electroacupuncture, not really my ballywhack. I think a lot of the musculoskeletal and sports medicine, it's really, it's the tradition having landed here and people doing exactly what you're talking about. They found something they enjoyed. They found something they were good at. It was something that helped them. It was something that helped their community. And you see things like the work of Whitfield Reeves and Matt Callison and all kinds of different folks that have taken some principles, working it in their own direction based on what they found. And then, thank goodness we've also got, really classic things. People like Wang Jui's work from Beijing, that continues to be taught. I find it's an incredibly rich environment. If you're interested in acupuncture, there's no end to what you're capable of learning. And there's no end to the different thoughts about it. And I'm telling you, I've never read Dr. So's books, but I've heard enough about him that I think I need to give him a look.
So's great for stories.
What great teacher is not good for stories?
Yeah.
Any in particular that you remember from him?
Oh, I wasn't there for this one, but there is a story about Dr. So is in his clinic, which was basically a garage in his house, and an ambulance pulls up, and there's this Chinese lady haranguing the ambulance drivers. She's basically forced them to bring her husband to Dr. So before going to the hospital. So opens the back door of the ambulance with needles in his mouth, which is how he always carried him around. Right? Needles in his mouth, and stands there looking at the guy's blue leg, pulls out a good sized needle and goes, boom. And the guy goes, whoo, and his leg starts to turn pink. There's another one that I always loved. Some businessman came in and laid down on the table with his suit and tie on.
Mm-hmm.
So took the scissors and cut his tie off.
It was just like a Marx Brothers routine.
This is all stories. I didn't see either of these, but they're great stories.
They're great stories. And, what it says to me is, look, there's a technology that we need to understand. We need to know how to use the tools. But there's also this piece about you need to kind of understand who somebody is. Who's the person that you're trying to help? And that's really important too.
You have to see it. You have to be able to look at the human body and see it in the Chinese terms.
That's right.
You have to be able to get that the lung controls the waterways, and that doesn't mean there's any path. Yang Qi moves through everything. It creates all motion. They didn't need peristalsis to explain digestion. They had Qi. They didn't need to have a pathway to get water to the bladder. You need to be able to look at the human and see them as a creation of Qi. Not energy, but Qi. Qi that makes stuff. Qi that makes things happen in stuff. And when people get to that, looking at the human body in front of them as this creation of this thing, Qi, then I think they get what the Chinese called heart knowledge, knowing things in ways that are not just being able to reproduce them on a test.
Yes. Well,
and that's all completely and totally fascinating.
Yes, it is. Keep you busy for a whole dang lifetime, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no pun intended, Mr. Felt, but I think that's a good place to put a pin in it for today.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and again, thanks for all the books.
Will there be more?
That gladdens my heart.
Yeah, there'll be more. I got a few more years, I think.
Well, that's it for today. I'm left once again impressed and appreciative of the immense effort and vision it took to bring Chinese medicine into the hands and hearts of practitioners here in the West. Bob's journey from the counterculture movement of the 1960s to becoming a publisher of foundational texts, it's inspiring, not just for what he accomplished, but for the persistence and the grit that fueled his work. One of the ideas that stood out to me was the scarcity of Chinese medicine books in those early days. It's hard to imagine now, with so much information at our fingertips, what it must have been like to attempt to learn this medicine when the basic texts were scarce. Bob's story reminds me that every book we pick up carries the spirit and drive of someone's dedication to translating and sharing ancient wisdom in our modern moment. I also appreciated his reflections on the role of community and connection, whether it was collaborating with translators or navigating the challenges of publishing. Bob's work was deeply rooted in relationships and a shared commitment to bringing this medicine to life in a new context. If there's one thing to take from today's conversation, it's that our work is always part of something bigger, shaped by the people, efforts, and moments that came before us. Bob's story is a reminder to respect and remember our history while continuing to find ways to make East Asian medicine accessible in everyday life. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.